There's a phrase I mentioned last week's podcast when I was talking about the catalyst for change, especially for those who've been in the helping professions. And that was about moral injury. And it's a topic I'm going to invite us to explore even further today on Awaken and Ascend. So thank you so much for all of you who are joining in right now. I am Jennifer Regular. I am the founder of Lighting the Path, where I get to focus and specialize in sacred leadership to really honor those who feel called to a higher purpose, be on the path from their career into their calling, and best support the elevation of humanity and consciousness in this time. I also get to host this podcast on Awaken and Ascend. I get to bring in featured change makers from all around the world to share in their mission and their embodiment of moving out of their career into their calling to inspire you and to gather the courage to do that yourself. So today we're talking about moral injury. And this is something that is often defined, if you're to look it up on the internet, in clinical and military terms. How I want to look at it, though, is how I've experienced it. And I know many of us are experiencing it now as we observe the world order as it is currently. Maybe disorder is a better word, right? And it's really like a split of your spirit, of your soul. It's a deep wound that goes beyond burnout, which is exhaustion, or trauma, which tends to be fear-based, out of fear, or a really significant event that shakes our sense of safety. Moral injury is values-based. It's more of an effect on our soul, in conflict with our deep core values. Maybe we've had to operate out of someone else's belief system, way of doing things, systems, where the emotions that surround it tend to be more about shame and about betrayal and guilt, even. And we no longer want to operate on those kind of frequencies. And that's why I think it's important for us to talk about today. So, really curious about what your thoughts are around moral injury, whether you've ever experienced it. One of the first steps in being able to walk in this path of healing from it is naming the fracture, naming what went out of alignment, where you got pulled out of your alignment, where you weren't attuned into your integrity, where you got pulled out of that and maybe had to witness something that was really disheartening to you, or betrayed by systems like I was in my social services field that were meant to help people, and you found yourself restricted or constricted in those fields or in those systems, or maybe you were part of that system yourself and found that they weren't providing the kind of support and resources that allowed you to be a full expression of who you truly were. And working in those type of institutions or systems as a healthcare provider, a therapist, a social worker, a mental health worker, and the like, that you're having to do a lot that goes outside of your belief system, out of your values, in the sake of following procedure, of policies, of rights, roles, and responsibilities, trying to meet the needs of others, being those in authority, and not being able to fully meet the needs of those you serve. And that's where we begin to experience that moral injury, that sense of disconnect from our true purpose, our true self, our expression of how we want to be able to support and help heal others and ultimately the world. And so that's why I think it's such an important topic to awaken and ascend with, is coming back into that place of remembrance through to ascension by way of alignment and activation. So this is the path that I'm offering for us today, is moving through that moral injury and seeing and naming those wounds, those attacks on spirit, if you will, as thresholds of moving into that space of wholeness, as an opportunity to reconnect to your why, to your purpose, to your soul's mission. What drew you into that field? What is drawing you now to serve a higher purpose, and maybe have a higher expression of who you are in your role, if you choose to stay in it and be able to transform those systems from the inside out. So let's get into that a little bit more now, shall we? Okay, so like I've been saying, this moral injury is like it creates a split inside, a fracture of the soul. And you may find yourself questioning, am I still a good person? Did I fail my purpose? Can I even trust myself again? And it's not just so much about what's happened as how you receive it, how you perceive it, interpret it, and make sense of it. And that's where that shame, that guilt, and that betrayal can start to creep in. So, have you noticed yourself carrying the guilt because you feel like you haven't done enough, or the shame because you felt like you've let somebody down, even if it wasn't your fault? Or maybe you felt betrayed by the system like I did. And those leaders who were meant to be in authority, or even just betraying yourself and promises you've made and values you've held that you've had to go against. So the way through isn't so much about pushing it down, repressing it, suppressing it, or even trying to justify it. It's coming back into alignment. It's remembering your deeper truth and finding the compassion again for yourself, and then reweaving that connection that you have to your soul into something greater. What's the bigger picture here? Where is your higher self? How would that part of you operate through this system or this job or this role that you might have? So here's the path forward that I'm suggesting for us, and it's 3 steps. The first one is recognition and naming the fracture, naming it, calling it what it is, acknowledging that something has pulled you out of alignment with your deepest values. Maybe even reassessing what your deepest values are, coming back home to that, to your center and what you stand for. Noticing the signs of that guilt, that shame, that betrayal, anything that might be questioning your integrity, which could be you. And then distinguishing this fracture, this moral injury from burnout. Like I said, which you can more strongly identify with as exhaustion, or trauma, which is fear based and threatens your sense of safety. Reminding yourself that moral injury is values based. And so here's something that you can practice. Maybe reflect on a moment when you felt like you couldn't do what was right because of constrictions, restrictions, or other belief systems or other patterns that you've been programmed with for people pleasing, for approval and for acceptance and for wanting to belong, or fear of losing your job, right? Where you're forced into choices that went against your heart. Name those and name them without any judgment. We're just creating some awareness around this now to name the fracture, to recognize it, to hold it and acknowledge it without judgment. And then we get to restore it. This is the returning to alignment and the second step, where you create the space to process the rupture. So this may come through journaling, through storytelling, through embodied practices. A lot of this is offered through my Inspired Living blog or on this podcast, for example, and other videos, what some of those practices might be. And you can always reach out to me too if you're having trouble finding those. And to practice self forgiveness, to practice compassion for the limits that were imposed on you, and only doing your best of what you had and were capable of and had the capacity for in that moment. And when you know better, you can do better, right? So reconnect with your guiding values, your soul purpose, what truly matters to you. Here's a practice where, again, you can do some self reflection and ask yourself, what do I most want to stand for, even in the most difficult of circumstances? And then realign your choices, even in small ways, to reconnect with that truth, to align with that truth. And then the third and final step I'll offer today is about reclaiming your purpose. This is renewing your sense of purpose, your meaningful engagement in your role, or maybe you want to find a new one or environment that supports you in keeping your vibration at a level that gives you the capacity to fulfill your role in a way that feels true and aligned for you. It's transforming the wound into wisdom, to integrating the lessons that are being offered in that, and to rebuild trust in yourself. And what kind of meaning your work still has for you, and really attuning yourself back into that space so you can approach things differently and thereby experience things differently. Remember, it's not about what's happening, it's how you perceive it, how you work with that, how you navigate that, and how you self regulate in as well. So rebuild the trust in yourself and the meaningfulness in your work. Step back from the service or step back into the service from a place of wholeness through integrity rather than through guilt or depletion or having trying to meet certain expectations that may not be yours. And here's another practice for you in this section, which is to identify one aligned action you could do now to honor your values moving forward. Something that brings you both the relief and the renewal. I'd love to hear what that is, where this lands for you. You can share that in the comments. Maybe you'd like to share this video with someone who may benefit from this self-reflection and this new level of awareness around moral injury, how it might be impacting you. I've been out of the social service field now for over a decade, and I'm just now realizing the impact that moral injury has had on me. So this is a place of self-forgiveness and a new level of self-awareness to help us come into that place of realignment and a renewed sense of purpose, to recognize it for what it is, but not to judge yourself for it. Thank you so much for joining me today on Awaken and Ascend, and I trust that we will be back again next week where we'll explore a new topic. And I'd love to hear actually what topics you're interested in. So even if you wanted to share that in the comments, I always read them. I'd love to hear from you. I appreciate your feedback as well. Thank you so much. Bye for now.